Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining us for Intelligent Automation in Oil and Gas. My name is Nicole Bamford, and I'm the moderator for today's session. On behalf of Leslie, Angeliki, Quinn, Candace, and I, we thank you for joining us for day one of the event. This presentation, Accelerating Oil and Gas Automation Practical Lessons from the Frontline, will be given by Taylor Kennedy, Intelligent Automation Leader at Huron, Scott Lashinsky, Managing Director at Huron, and Andy Otterman, Director of IT at Tallgrass Energy. And their presentation promises to be well worth a listen. Before we get started, here are some quick administrative points. During the webinar, if you have questions for the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A box on your screen. These will be answered during the question session after the presentation. Likewise, for any technical issues, please write them into the Q&A section and we'll get to them right away. The widgets on your screen can be resized and dragged around for your viewing preferences. We encourage you to visit the Resource Center on your screen for additional content and resources we and our sponsors have provided for you. So make sure you're sitting comfortably, and I'll now hand it over to Scott so we can begin.
Sounds great. Thanks, Nicole, and thanks everyone for joining today. Really excited about the session here today, which is going to be focused on how our clients are leveraging intelligent, automated, and intelligent process automation as a lever for value creation within their businesses. And specifically, this is going to get into some of the tactical steps that our clients have been able to leverage, again, getting into some of the frontline experiences. And we're really excited to be joined here today by one of our clients, Andy Otterman from Tallgrass Energy. So joined here today, and really what we're going to focus on here is how our clients have looked at these various opportunities within intelligent process automation to really hone in and identify what are the opportunities that exist, where do we start as an organization, what's required to ultimately execute on an intelligent process automation initiative, and lastly, how do we ultimately look at and quantify the business justification and the overall expected return on investment from these types of programs. So again, joined here today by one of my colleagues, Taylor Kennedy. Taylor's one of the leaders in our intelligent process automation team. And then also, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, Andy Otterman, who's the Director of IT at Tallgrass Energy. So Taylor, if you wouldn't mind if we could just advance to the next slide, please.
Should be advanced on my side.
Okay.
Does everybody see the first?
Okay, so before we dive in, we just wanted to get a little bit of perspective from the audience here. We wanted to get an understanding. It seems like the whole aspect and the whole conversation really around automated process or process automation and intelligent process automation via robotics has become a focal area in most organizations, really spanning across a number of different functional areas within the business. Before we dive into the session here today, though, we wanted to get a sense from the audience around within your own respective business, how many process automations has your business undertaken, just to get some perspective. So you can see on here the various groupings as we've set them up. 0, meaning your business hasn't currently embarked on this initiative, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 30, or over 30 automations. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment here to provide some perspective. Okay, give it just a moment here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and proceed here. So first of all, interesting stratification of the data. Just in kind of looking at some of the high-level results here on the next slide, you can see that there's a number of organizations that are maybe early adopters on this in the sense that they've actually transacted on over 30 robotic process automation or intelligent process automation initiatives. So that's roughly 1/3 of the respective respondents for today's session. And then on the other end of the curve, we have a number of organizations, about 18.5%, who haven't embarked on any form of intelligent process automation, and then 40% that have done 0 to 5. So, as we look at it right now, we've got about 60% roughly that are under kind of that five automations to date. We're then roughly 1/3 have done over 30, and then in the middle there, not a huge number of respondents. So kind of what we've seen. A lot of organizations have already embarked on this, leveraged this as a tool for value creation. Others are still lagging behind. So what we're going to get into today is again, just sharing a little bit of perspective. Before we do, just to maybe provide some context on ourselves and certainly some of the content. Andy Otterman will introduce himself as well as Tallgrass Energy. But just a little bit of background on Huron Consulting Group, who both Taylor and myself represent. We are a publicly traded professional services firm, roughly 4,000 professionals. But I think what's noteworthy here as we get into the discussion is that we do have a dedicated team of professionals that focus on the oil and gas, as well as the oil and gas industry sector, as well as just general energy practitioners as well. Many of our colleagues have actually spent time in industry, so have a strong appreciation for a lot of the business challenges that you all are looking to address as part of your transformation efforts. And also, I think as part of this, our ethos is really around delivering value creation through operational and performance improvement, and specifically focusing in the areas of accounting, finance, and operations. And taking that, and a lot of where we oftentimes, our approach to transformation really spans several areas in the business. So a big part of it gets into doing a lot of the detailed process mapping, identifying areas for process optimization, looking at areas around org design and where those opportunities might exist for center of excellence or shared services models within the business across different functional areas. Also looking at the areas around people, identifying where there's needs and opportunities for either reskilling, retooling of individuals. But a big part of it really gets into technology, looking at everything across architecture, enterprise applications, and looking at the business, whether it's in the ERP side of the world, the CRM, performance management applications, business intelligence, and other areas. But really a significant amount of the work that we deliver is really enabled through technology innovation and implementations. So I think it really transcends well into the discussion that we're going to have today, because really where our clients are getting the final mile of value is by then leveraging the robotic process automation or intelligent process automation, which really leverages everything around process redesign and looking at areas for opportunity there, looks at technology, looks at org design, et cetera. So big part of this is, this isn't just a robotics effort. This hits a number of different facets of the business. So before we go too far into it, I'm going to turn it over to Taylor to spend a minute. And Taylor, if you wouldn't mind just kind of building on some of the principles here, and then we'll turn it over to Andy Otterman to share his experiences from Tallgrass Energy. So Taylor?
Sounds fantastic. Thank you, Scott. So before we get into the requirements for a digital workforce, let's talk a little bit about what a digital workforce looks like from our standpoint. These are essentially components of automation. On the left would be the most simple, a traditional automation, maybe VBA type scripts. And then as we move to the right, they get progressively more complex. The four on the right are generally what I see as a digital workforce. And they're comprised of a digital worker, which is robotic process automation. They're comprised of a digital reader, which is intelligent intake or OCR application, a digital talker or chatbots, conversational AI, and then a digital thinker, which is cognitive automation. And generally, when we see our clients implementing a digital workforce, they're implementing a myriad of these things to focus on specific processes. An example of two of those interacting together might be uploading weld reports from the front line using OCR digital intake capabilities, extracting data from that, and then moving it around using a digital worker. As we see our clients driving at this, the ones that are more successful than others are the ones that are taking a programmatic approach rather than a project approach. And the programmatic approach is eventually getting to be building bots at scale from 30, 40, 50 automations a year and up. In order to do that, there's a number of items that our clients seem to have to accomplish in order to be able to scale efficiently. And so moving around this honeycomb, and I'm going to come back to this honeycomb a couple times. But first, there needs to be an enterprise-wide strategy that aligns back to the directional strategies of the organization and aligns the team to mobilize towards enabling a digital workforce to support our human workforce. The very next thing, and my guess is a lot of people are at this stage, is you need to identify system optimization opportunities. You need to be able to find things to go automate and do it quickly. We need to be able to prioritize them quickly as well. And then from there, we need to pass those over to a center of excellence that is established, that has the governance structure and the team to support the automation, build the automation in a safe and sustainable way, roll it out, and then continue to identify, prioritize new processes for automation. On the back end, we need to potentially improve some of the processes that we have either disrupted, or we need to improve processes that we need to enable for automation because they are mundane and repetitive and don't need human intervention. And then the last two things, as we potentially disrupt our organization with a digital workforce, we need to manage the change effectively. We need to communicate early and often, and again, align teams around the vision of the organization moving forward. And then lastly, we need to upskill our staff and maximize those staff because most of these initiatives that we see are employee expense neutral. The best practices guide or things to think about is really just a quick slide talking about five use case stories of our clients. And I'm going to go through two of these today, and then Andy's going to go through a story. But just to give these some color quickly, maybe you're early in the stage and getting buy-in is really critical. Robots can be scary. I'll talk about this one in depth. Once you've done that, aligning a team and establishing a center of excellence is very, very important. Andy will talk a little bit more about that. We see some of our clients struggle with velocity in their development cadence, and it's because oftentimes they don't have a structured development cycle. And so there's a client story there that if you want to dig into more, feel free to contact me directly. Some points we see our clients be overwhelmed with ideas because they did such a good job socializing the concept of automation, which is a great sign of success, but that can come with its own problems. Again, there's a potential problem there. And then the last client story that I'll actually talk about today is this value capture often requires workforce redesign. Really important that if we are going to build automations, we're going to implement a digital workforce, that we then turn around and enable our staff to be able to do more high value driven work, to be able to capture the value that we've done from those automations. So moving into the first client story, and that's really what this presentation about is giving you guys some client stories of how our clients have overcome specific problems as they've gone to implement their digital workforce. Before we jump into that first one, why don't we go through the next polling question, Scott? Scott, you may be on mute.
All right, so the next polling question that we have here then gets into some of the specific case studies here. So if we could, maybe just to get a sense from the audience today, as you look at your activities around robotic process automation or intelligence process automation, maybe you could share, some of your organizational priorities in what it is that you're looking to accomplish. And you can select as many of these as you feel applicable, whether it's just simply augmentation of workforce productivity, or looking for opportunities to improve compliance around regulatory reporting, looking at opportunities around supply chain efficiency. So we'd like to get a sense from the audience here, what are those organizational objectives that you're looking to accomplish here? We'll just give it a minute. And while you all are submitting your responses here, excellent. So just to kind of provide some feedback here, so it looks like two of the big areas of opportunity are just the elimination of errors to improve quality in business processes. 73% of you identified that as one of the big objectives. And then number two on here was really just kind of augmentation of workforce productivity to enable higher value-added activities, which are, I think, some of the big areas that we oftentimes see. And then one of the other areas that seem to have a lot of responses here is just to improve overall customer experience and then supply chain efficiency. So some of the common areas that we see our clients focus on when they start to lean into RPA and IPA. So we wanted to transition this then and get into some of the real world examples here. Again, this is supposed to be lessons from the front line. So we're going to start to transition over into real world obstacles for a digital workforce. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition back over to Taylor. Maybe you can spend a minute to talk about getting buy-in and some of the challenges there, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a story about a large federal entity in the States. They are just getting started with their automation journey. I know some of you are very deep in this path, maybe some of you in the same spot. The executive team is a little bit unsure of this automation concept and how efficient it's going to be. There's a lot of cost scrutiny that's going on in their industry currently. Staff is a little bit nervous about robots. They're nervous that they might take their jobs, that we're trying to replace them, not upskill them. And because of that, there's also a union that is involved looking after the best interests of the employees and potentially can block the implementation. And so that's kind of the story. That's where we start. That honeycomb in the top right, this is tying back to building that enterprise-wide strategy. And so moving to the bottom left in our approach, there's a couple things that we did to soften this approach and create some success early on. So the first one I'd say is language is really, really key, very, very important. Keywords that our client could tie back to and relate to were specifically macro-like workflows. We were very diligent and intentional around staying away from the word bots or robots and using the concept of macro-like workflows. And that was something that they had implemented successfully in the past. And so it felt a little more germane and a little more approachable based on where they were. Two, as you're potentially looking for things to go automate quickly, to build out maybe an early POC, which we oftentimes use to socialize the concept of automation, sometimes a quick place to go look is if you're taking engagement scores, look where the engagement scores across your enterprise are the lowest. That sometimes can be a little bit of a hint of places where some of those jobs maybe are more mundane or your staff isn't as engaged. And then fourth, create a communication strategy, communicate early and often. Let people know what's going on, let them know how it aligns back to the directional strategies of the organization, how it's going to empower them and enable them. With this specific client, we were able to build out a POC within about 7 weeks. And again, we did so because we quickly identified some good use cases to go build for automation, put those into production. We gained support from 5 different business lines that were very excited about automation. After that, the union was also pretty jazzed. And at the end of building out that POC, we actually had staff members that were really championing the concept of a digital workforce and automation because they were so excited about the work that we had been able to build for them. Our client success was we were able to kick off a phase 2, which is very exciting for us. That client is currently deep in the throes of expanding their digital workforce. Before I kick things over to Andy, as we are trying to quickly identify some use cases for automation, I think one of the laurels that we lean on is we're very good at this because we've done it so many times. One of the first things we do is we start with a heat map. In the resources provided, there's a deeper dive into the specific sub-processes in finance and accounting. If you want to look at supply chain or human resources or another business process, happy to dig into that as well with you. Andy, again, who I'm going to pass this over to, gave a good example of how we use these heat maps. If you're digging into automation for the first time, potentially you're walking into a very dark room, and utilizing a heat map like this is a good way to have a flashlight to know where in the room to go look. The next piece is figuring out the viability and value of those automations and quickly prioritizing those. But this is a great place to start. Andy, let me pass things over to you.
Thanks, Taylor. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Otterman, and as Scott and Taylor mentioned, I'm in a Director of IT role at Tallgrass Energy. So my team is responsible for supporting our enterprise applications, data and analytics capabilities, as well as a business relationship management capability with our internal business partner customers. I'm excited to be here today to talk about something that I'm pretty passionate about, which is generally automation and kind of digital transformations. But before we get into kind of the meat of the presentation, a little bit about Tallgrass and who we are. So Tallgrass is a privately held company within the Blackstone Infrastructure Fund with Blackstone Partners. It's a multi-party investment with Blackstone, GIC, Enagás, NPS, and USS. We are a midstream energy company, very focused on growing quickly, but also growing with a strong orientation towards value, with assets in transportation, storage, terminaling. We also have a water services organization and G&P assets. We're pretty proud about the fact that we've been named one of Colorado's top workplaces for the past 6 years. And we do have a large operations center here in the western suburbs of Denver, Colorado, but our headquarters is located out of Leawood, Kansas. We're just shy of 900 employees across 11 states in which we operate. And again, looking to drive automation in an intelligent, meaning and value-oriented way for our organization. So that's kind of a lead into our conversation today. And as we go towards the next slide, it really is, a framework for how we view leveraging automation to realize what we see as one of the kind of ultimate capabilities, which is optimizing business operations. As we look at within Tallgrass, that opportunity to go and either predict with better insight movements in a macro environment as relates to commodity prices and how we take advantage of that, or anticipate a potential failure of a key component on our pipeline, ultimately driving to improved uptime. Those are all really, really big and frankly pretty challenging questions that we're looking to address, and being able to successfully answer those questions is going to lead to a significant amount of business value. But the challenge for us is, frankly, as a fairly lean organization, we run into situations where many of our internal team members are, stuck maybe doing some of the manual day-to-day effort. And as we look at that opportunity to kind of take some of that day-to-day activity off their shoulders, this is an opportunity within automation, certainly not to conduct a workforce reduction activity, but really push and orient our internal teams to doing higher value add business tasks, business operations. And again, that goes back to finding ways to drive increased dollars to the bottom line, being able to improve customer relationships, continuing to maintain a #1 priority focus on safety, both of our employees as well as the environments and the communities in which we operate. So this really is kind of an outside-in view around how we take our teams and push them into spaces where they can drive more value for the company aligned to our strategy. And so as we slide into the next view here, this is how we've really thought about all sorts of new capabilities, but primarily for today's discussion, automation. And it's a kind of a 1, 2, 3 approach. And that is, we really want to start out by thinking about this at scale. So we think big. A digital workforce, as I think Taylor mentioned, is something that we see being an enabler across a variety of different business functions, and having that capability at scale really does, again, allow us to push into new and different value-oriented spaces. But I think harkening back to the survey and kind of the reason that many of you are joining today, how do we think about doing work processes with a higher level of quality? How do we think about using robots to help adhere to compliance or regulatory needs? I think there's a lot of value and opportunities that we can derive through this capability. So thinking about it big, what are all of the capabilities that we can bring to bear? And then as we do that, certainly that's a future goal, and it's not possible to realize all of those capabilities out of the beginning. So we want to start small. We want to think about what are the right 5 to 7 use cases that are going to help us not only demonstrate that automation and robots aren't scary, they're viable, they can help us, but then 2, are value-oriented, such that once they've been delivered into a production environment, we can take the business enablement, the business case, and extrapolate that to that at-scale thinking, and then gain the investment to move the initiative forward, which then translates into that third box, which is how do we scale fast? We've gotten some quick wins. That's great. We now need to continue to iterate and deliver on these automations so that we can realize that think big outcome on a fairly short time frame. So I want to think and kind of dive into the start small space, because I think that is really a place where we initially had a good amount of debate, and it was purposeful because we wanted to start on the right things. And based on some of the survey responses, many folks are in the 0 to 5 range in terms of automation. It looks like about 58%. So this may be helpful as something we've applied, and perhaps you may be able to use. And that really is trying to think about identifying what are the right use cases. Maybe a half step back here, thinking about kind of socializing this opportunity. How do we find these, and how do we gain kind of the buy-in? And to Taylor's point, there's a bit of a heat map that approach that we can use. Where are some of the common areas to go and look? And as we partnered with Hurons through some work that's kind of tangential to this, we were able to identify a couple of areas in both our payables and our receivables space that were worthy of looking a little bit further. And both of these use cases passed the test through the use case funnel, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute here. But one of the things we're looking for is highly manual processes. This is really a key first step in my mind, because reducing the manual work, bringing a digital worker to bear is really what's going to help drive significant value as you look to take perhaps a group or a set of individuals from doing this specific task and moving them over here, right? The more hours that they spend doing task 1 versus task 2 can now be allocated to this new activity. The fact that it's consistently repeatable is really important as well. Certainly from a technology point of view, the repeatability makes the building of that robot just that much easier. If it's always the same thing day after day or period after period, then you can build a robot once and apply it many times. And then high volume. This really does become something that from our perspective is really important too. As we think about some of these use cases, it really does, again, kind of give us more and more value as we take people out of doing this manual day-to-day work and reorient them. So that's how we view the initial funnel into the use case. And then the follow-up question, and I think it's always a follow-up question here at Tallgrass, is, okay, great, so what's the value in doing this? Reducing manual work is certainly something we want to do, but as part of this start small approach, again, with the mindset of trying to gain scale business funding for this, we want to demonstrate this capability has hard ROI. So what are the dollars we can help bring back to the table for Tallgrass? So a couple of examples of use cases that we found that were really impactful and helped us out. One is in our payable space. So today at Tallgrass, we maintain a control for review of payments of greater than $1,000. And the control really states that we need to be reviewing what is on the invoice versus what is processed through the payable system. And it's simply just a matter of kind of tying a set of 5 attributes out across the two sets of data, again, what's on the invoice and what's in the system, and ensuring that they match. And so we have a team of 2 who spend about 50% of their day, so 4 hours each, or effectively a full-time equivalent, working on reviewing these invoices and the systematic information. On an average basis, we're north of 90% accuracy, again, between the invoice and the system. And really the exceptions are the only places where the team needs to spend their time remediating issues. And so this is definitely an area which is ripe for automation, again, because we can bring to bear an OCR, an optical character recognition capability, have that deliver the information to a robot, and then have a robot do the compare between what's in the system and what's on the invoice. So what we did was, in working with Huron, built that exact thing and then delivered effectively an exception report to that team. Now, the team certainly wasn't able to step away from 2 folks at 50% of their day dedicated to this activity, but they were able to significantly reduce their time allocated to this body of work by almost 30 or 40%. And what that translated into then was the opportunity to go and talk to vendors about being able to, improve payable times, shorten cycles on receiving money, or being able to switch vendors from, receiving check payments to perhaps ACH. And that has a material cost to Tallgrass at the end of the day. So a good opportunity to shift away from spending time doing kind of that manual day-to-day. Again, thinking back about the framework, analyze the business relationships we have with our vendors and seek to optimize it by driving improved financials. At an AR level, we have a similar process, but again, on invoices that go out to customers, we have a team that spends a team of 4 that spends 120 hours every month reviewing invoices that we plan to deliver to customers and comparing that against what's in a system. We want to ensure that our customers are getting not only timely invoices, but also accurate invoices. Again, very similarly, this is an area where we can apply OCR and we can then deliver that information to a robot such that an exception report is built. So now the team isn't spending 120 hours at the end of every month close. They're spending more in the neighborhood of 12 to 20 hours to go and identify the issues, remediate the issues, and then generate the revised invoice. This is something that for us is also has a significant amount of value, not only from the ability for these business analysts to move out of the manual day-to-day work, but then also participate in a critical transformation project we're in the middle of executing, on top of the ability to support their commercial partners as they prepare for engaging with customers, either existing or potentially new customers, and ensure that they've got all the right data and information to support the outcomes they're looking to drive through the initiatives. So before we move to the next slide, just one last thought that I think was something that we saw being very, very impactful in terms of socializing this. And I think, one of the things that Taylor hit on was this idea of being purposeful in how we communicate and the language we use. And certainly, we're talking about robots, but we really are talking about automating and removing people from non-value-add work. And a great way for us to demonstrate that was through an internal activity that we hosted. It was late fall last year. It was effectively a technology innovation day, but it wasn't about IT presenting all the great tech that's being delivered at Tallgrass. It's our business partners talking about how they're using technology to improve their daily tasks. Better, faster, smarter. It was how we are enabling the enterprise through technology. And we had a lot of great interest specifically in this particular space. Because everyone who walked in saw something that they could go and automate. Oh, now I get how this works. How do I apply it to my area? How do I think about delivering automation for my space? And as a result of that kind of engagement and that thinking, we've seen more and more interest and engagement show up. And frankly, that's part of the transformation opportunity that we've really tried to take advantage of, and that is bringing our customers along for the ride, if you will. And as we move into the next slide, I think one of the opportunities that we as an IT organization consistently recognize is that we play a role in supporting our customers transforming the way they run their business. But we certainly are not the end-all, be-all in terms of knowledge of our customers' data, nor knowledge of our customers' business processes. And so we really look to create a center of excellence model with the IT team being a support and admin role. We want to help people learn, so we're there to teach in terms of how to build a robot. We're there to support that robot once it's been put into production. We're there to administer the system, but we really look to have subject matter experts, both from a process perspective and a technology perspective, from each of our business units, step in and help out to build these robots. Again, this is a way for us not only to ensure that we've got the right business knowledge and the process expertise, but we've also got the right backing and advocacy for change. And I think lastly, it helps us with velocity. When there's kind of a wave of excitement and a wave of use case ideation, you can quickly get buried by the number of opportunities. But by perhaps sourcing some of the knowledge and sourcing some of the development to our customers, that's something we've been successful with in other spaces, and believe strongly is the right approach for Tallgrass in order to do this at scale. So it's a little bit about us. Again, appreciate the time, and I'm going to pass it back to Taylor.
Thank you, sir. So we've got a couple more minutes, and I want to save some time for one or two questions. So I'm going to move quickly through these last couple slides. One more story. This is a little further down the path. This is actually a large healthcare system who's invested about $1 million in their center of excellence for their year, based on the staff that they've implemented. They've built 20, 30 automations that year. And now they're at the point that they need to justify the spend. And we see this happen fairly often. that most of these initiatives are employee expense neutral. Again, this is about uplifting, upskilling, and enriching the lives of our staff, not replacing them. But if we're going to do that, and we're going to automate some of their work, if we don't upskill them, if we don't invest in our staff, we're really just going to be spending for two forms of our workforce, our digital workforce and our human workforce. And so it's really important to be able to upskill our staff to be able to justify that value. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I would say one key nugget, one key takeaway is, as you start the journey, as you build out the enterprise-wide strategy, dig into how you define the value based on what the automations are doing. If it's going to be based on work that you are alleviating, if it's going to be based on risk that you're pulling out, if it's going to be based on revenue that you're increasing or expenses that you're reducing, make sure that you're firm on that, so that when you get to the back end of building the automations, they've done a bunch of work, that's not a muddy water that you need to get into to justify spend in the ongoing years. Before I pass things over to Scott, I want to do one more polling question, and this is really a service for you all. So this is, what is your 60-day goal? You've now spent 40 minutes with us talking about automation. Potentially it's scheduling a meeting with an executive team to socialize capabilities. Maybe you're trying to find a software vendor to install. Oftentimes we see people trying to find a use case and figuring out what they need to go do, or it's implementing a COE, or it's maybe hiring a trusted partner. Answer this. In 60 days, I'll send a nudge to you that just says, how'd it go? This was your 60-day goal. Would love to hear from you guys, one, what it is and how that process is going, and happy to be a resource moving forward. I'll leave this up for about 30, 40 seconds, and then I'll pass things back over to Scott. I'll pause for a second while you guys all answer. Looks like an overwhelming response of find that initial use case. Again, I want to point you guys back to the heat maps that are in the resources for this webcast. And again, happy to talk through those. If you're trying to find something to go automate, happy to be a resource for you. My contact information will be on the back. Scott, let me pass things to you to go through our last slide.
Sounds great. Thanks, Taylor, and thanks, Andy and Taylor, for your comments and points of view that you shared today. A lot of good insights. So kind of building off that last question there on what is the focus coming out of this, and how can you make sure that the insights and the perspectives and the information that you receive today can ultimately be put into action. Going back to one of the earlier slide questions, it seems like a number of the organizations that are in attendance today are still early into the journey here on leveraging robotic process automation or intelligent process automation as that value creation tool for the business. So you've heard Andy talk a little bit about this, and also, one of the other poll questions got into what are the objectives here, and a number of you responded. I think it was a high percentage. I think it was roughly 60%. It kind of highlighted two things. Number one, augmenting your current workforce. Number two was being able to shift a lot of the responsibilities and focus from your team members from those highly repetitive, manually burdensome tasks into areas that can be more value add and value creative, or creative more value for the business. So how do we go through, and how do we ultimately identify these areas? And a lot of this gets into not only what are the areas, so what are those specific use cases, but also building out that point of view on where do we start. Again, what's required to successfully execute a robotic process automation initiative. You heard Andy talk a little bit around kind of that shared services or center of excellence model, and being a good partner with your customers and all the different constituents that surround these initiatives, both internal as well as external. And then also that quantification of the business case. So I think most organizations that we meet with, oftentimes there's an abundance of opportunities to leverage intelligent process automation, and it's really helping to understand where do we start. And so part of what what our team has put together through a number of these engagements is really a framework here that we refer to as our enterprise automation framework that really helps us work with our clients, with one of the key deliverables being that heat map that Andy and Taylor made reference to. So a lot of this goes in and helps to really look at the business and really define, what are the future state objectives and what does the future state business look like across eight different elements, or we refer to these as 8 different dimensions within the business. So it's everything in terms of how is this ultimately going to serve as an enabler to the business strategy? What are the business requirements, and what does that future state business look like from a functional standpoint, from a technology standpoint, from a process flow standpoint, and really baselining those various future state objectives against the current state set of capabilities. And in doing that, then it allows us to understand what those gaps are between that target future state versus where it is that we're performing today. And then going through, as we've identified those use cases, those gaps, building out a return analysis on those different activities. And in doing that, it ultimately informs a prioritized execution strategy, or that roadmap that you've heard us reference earlier. So a big part of this, and this is something that we do typically over a duration of just it can be as compressed and abbreviated as doing this in kind of a 1-week time frame. Some that are more elongated, we're trying to get into some of the detailed business objectives, detailed requirements, and really putting a lot of granularity around this. But this is something that we've leveraged with a number of our clients, specifically within the oil and gas or oil field services companies as well, to go in and help them to identify, again, what are those opportunities, where do we start, what's required, and what is the return on investment that can be expected out of these types of initiatives. So again, if this is something that's of interest coming out of the session today, please feel free to reach out to Taylor. I know he'd be more than happy to spend the time and discuss this in more detail. But without any further delay, I did want to make sure that we addressed some of the questions. For those of you that are online, if you want to go ahead, feel free to submit questions in the chat function and the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. It looks like there's a few questions that have come in today, one of which had inquired around the respective technology vendors that we see being leveraged within this space. So Taylor, if you wouldn't mind, and maybe provide some feedback and commentary on the typical vendors that we see in this area. Taylor, you're on mute. Sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you. I'd say from a digital worker and RPA standpoint, we often see UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, or some of the heavy hitters, and we are happy to help you figure out which of those or others might be helpful for you to install based on your internal infrastructure, designs, and goals. From Digital Talker, Digital Thinker, AWS is obviously a big one that can play in there. And again, happy to talk further about those.
Okay, thanks, Taylor. Taylor, there is one more question just in terms of any other commentary that you can share on general use cases, or what some of the more common use cases that you've seen within the industry.
Yeah, Andy, I might send this one over to you. You and I talked a lot about the regulatory space. Do you want to talk about, how you've seen some of that as we've gone to try to find use cases within Tallgrass?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, looking at the heat map, we're obviously looking at a lot of what I call kind of the corporate center space as areas for consistent, repeatable, potentially highly manual tasks. Also thinking about any type of filing, that we may have from a compliance or regulatory perspective with a federal, state, county, township entity. That may also extend into, again, as this corporate center, but the tax space as well, where you're just simply taking data and moving it from perhaps a system onto a form. If the system doesn't natively generate that form, perhaps there's an opportunity for applying automation there as well.
Great. Thanks, Andy.
Great. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Taylor, Andy, and Scott, for your interesting and informative webinar. For those in the audience, if you want to listen again, this webinar will be available on demand shortly. And finally, thank you to you wherever you are for taking the time to listen in. We look forward to having you on the next session starting in just a few minutes. Have a great day, everyone.